We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today we're talking about what might be the absolute best way to catch piles and piles of those big sow female bass in the pre-spawn and the spawn. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one. Got him. That's a good fish. That's a good fish. Oh yeah, whoa. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and finally the Big Lake is at full pool. It's a beautiful March day. It's a great day to come out and catch some bass, and they were biting very well. We're in the spawn here, full on 100% spawn, and we've been there for a couple of weeks now. The lake is full pool. Those bass are comfortable moving back up into those shallow pockets to make their beds and lay their eggs. And we know how it happens, right? The buck males go in, they make the beds, the females come in, lay their eggs, and then leave, and then the males stick around for a little while as fry garters until that next generation, those baby bass, until they get a footing, and even then the males, they'll leave out for the main lake, leaving the little bass to fend for themselves, and the next generation continues. But there is a special way that I like to fish for bass in the pre-spawn and especially the spawn. It is the best technique that I can think of because all those bass are going to be in the same types of areas. Very rarely are you going to have that opportunity any other time of year than right during the spawn or even in the late pre-spawn. Those bass are all going to be packed up in pretty much the same area. So there's a bait that I like to use. There's a specific way of fishing that I like to do, and it's a surprise to no one. It's a jig, probably my favorite way to fish. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Lowbrow, you said that about the Texas rig. But I really mean that about this jig. Not just in the spawn, not just in the spring, but all year long. A jig is a proven winner, and I can hear you now. You say, Lowbrow, I don't like fishing a jig. I don't catch fish with a jig. I don't have any confidence in a jig. Well, as my dad used to tell me when I would tell him I wasn't able to do something, he'd look at me and he'd say, well, now's the time to learn. And I mean that in the best way possible, because during the pre-spawn, you have a lot more leeway when those bass are feeding up and they're hungry. You've got a lot more leeway to figure things out. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be 100% on point with your fishing game. So you have some error margin, right? You've got some margin for error that you can use. And once you start catching bass with a jig, like we talked about with the bitsy bug jigs and the stick bait trailers, how effective those can be, you can graduate to something like a regular flipping jig, or in this case, I'm using an arky jig. An arky jig for me, a casting style jig for me during the spawn is key. And there's a reason why I prefer this specific type of jig. And it's that wide head, because I like to skip these. Skipping your bait is going to be a great benefit. While it's not mandatory, it greatly helps. If you can't skip your bait, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. So even during the pre-spawn, great time to practice skipping a jig, skipping a fluke, something of that nature. And something like this casting jig or arky jig, as they're more commonly known, something like this will work exceptionally well because it's got that really wide head. Now, where am I fishing these? Well, I'm getting shallow. I'm fishing super skinny water, beating the bank, as they say. I'm taking these jigs and I'm either paralleling the bank and casting right on the edge of structure like fallen timber, laydowns, or flooded brush or riprap banks or something like that. But more importantly, I will take the boat and I will actually turn it perpendicular to the bank so I can line up a good shot, line up a good cast, and I will let the current carry me down that bank and I'll skip up under that flooded brush. Like we said, skipping is key. It's not 100% necessary. You can actually cast to the outside of that flooded brush, or you can cast around that laydowns or timber or whatever, and you can be super effective. But skipping your bait that really takes your game to a whole new level, especially when those bass are going to be way up deep. And on a sunny bank, on the bank where you're going to get a lot more sun, you know, the north facing bank, up under that flooded brush is more likely to be where those beds are, as that shallow water warms up more and the bass can use that to keep their eggs warm. And you want to look for places that don't necessarily have a great deal of current because, well, current washes away eggs. That's not what those bass need. So you're going to look for current seams, places that are outside of the current, up under brush, back in the shallows, back in flats. Those types of places I have found over the years to be the prime locations for bass to have their beds. Now, as we've said before, and I cannot stress this enough, when you catch a bass off bed, put it right back. I do not care if you say, I'm going to catch that buck male, I'm going to put him in my live well, so he'll be out of the way so I can catch the female. Don't do that, okay? Put that buck male back, because a lot of times there's not a female there. Once you get that buck male off, that female's probably already gone. In most instances, at least from what I've done, I'm usually catching the female first. Rarely have I caught the male first. And that was the case today. I pulled about 3 females off of the bed, and I maybe had them for 30 to 45 seconds before I was able to release them. And one of them was particularly stubborn because they had choked the jig, so I had to get it out, but it was still a race against the clock to get that bass back down in the water. That's something that I'm really adamant about in the spawn. Please put those bass back. Now, what type of gear am I using? Well, this will work just fine. My standard bait cast setup with 30-pound braid, and I've got 17-pound fluorocarbon leader. You can see how beat up this jig is. I've got just a little Guggen Kraken Crawl, just the Kraken Crawl Junior, the little small one on there. I don't have to, cut them down. They make just about the perfect size bait. Now, as far as the jig goes, you can see that this one here, you've got a lot of sunfish resemblance, and that's something that I like. I like to have something that will resemble sunfish because, as we all know, bluegill, long-ear sunfish, shellcracker, pumpkin seed, warmouth, or whatever, bass hate them, especially during the spawn, because they're going to come up and try to eat those eggs. That's why I'm using this, and that's why it's very effective. Something that will impersonate a bluegill, and a jig does that exceptionally well. It's one of the very few times that I'm very fixated on color. I very much want to impersonate a bluegill, even if that water's got some stain to it, even if we're looking at only a couple of feet or less of visibility. I want to be able to mimic a bluegill. I find that to be very, very effective. Now, if it's a low light condition, if the conditions are more toward dusk dark, as they say, or even at nighttime, then I'll go to something black and blue and purple. But for most of the time, I'm going to be using a good old sunfish imitating skirt, and probably something like a green crawl or maybe a brown crawl, something along those lines. I feel that that is the most effective way for me to trigger those bass, because they're not feeding out of an eating instinct. They're not going after that jig out of an eating instinct. They're attacking it to protect their bed. So it's a very different type of scenario. You've got to be pinpoint with your casts, so you have to be practicing that. Make sure you get your casts on point, because you have to come right on that bed, or you have to drag the jig over it, hop it over it, because rarely are those bass going to go outside of that to get anything, because they're saying, hey, it's outside of my hemisphere. I don't have to worry about it. So today, as I was able to fish, these nice jigs like this up under flooded brush, well, I was able to put myself on some really nice bass. Oh well. Got him. Oh, I got him. That's a good one. Oh, yeah. Come on, buddy. Get in here. That's a good bass right there. Look at that. Gorgeous, beautiful fish. That might be, I think, that's probably the female. Come on. I had her pretty good. She's pretty good sized. There we go. Gorgeous, gorgeous fish. Beautiful, beautiful fish. Thank you, sweetheart. 2.25 pound bass. Go get back on bed. So that was a nice 2-pound bass. That was what I was talking about. I got the female out of the brush first, and I didn't even bother fishing for the male. I just moved right on. Normally, you're going to stop, put the trolling motor down, put the power poles down or whatever, and you're going to pick the area apart. I didn't feel any need to. I just decided to move on, and I was able to catch a few more fish down that same stretch of bank. Nothing absolutely huge. I caught a couple that were about 1.5 pounds, and then the rest were in that 2-pound, 2.25 pound area. So still a very fun day. I'll take those all day long. You know, as we say, a dink over a skunk. So let's go out on the water and let me show you how I'm using that jig, how I'm making targeted casts under flooded brush and along the bank. Plus, we'll also look at how I'm throwing out to hydrilla flats, looking at empty spots in the hydrilla and putting the jig in there and how I'm working it. All right, we've got this old Denny Brower structure jig from Strike King right there, and I'm using it to skip up under, you know, the flooded brush like that. Give it a couple of pops, yo-yo it a little bit, and then I'm bringing it right back. I'm not worried about working it all the way to the boat, but you see what I'm doing here? I'm just skipping that jig in. And it's like we've talked about before. If you can't skip your bait, you're going to be at a distinct disadvantage, especially fishing during the spawn, the pre-spawn. So learn how to do that. Learn how to skip your jigs. Learn how to skip your worms. Learn how to skip your flukes or whatever. You can pretty much skip anything if you try hard enough. And I'm just giving my bait a couple of hops and I'm bringing it right back down. That's how I'm covering water. And that's all I'm doing. That is all I'm doing to work this bait, as far as when I'm up close. Skipping it just like that. Hitting those targeted areas, those areas where those bass are either going to be up on bed. Oh, I just got bit and I missed it. He moved it to the side of the bed. Let's get back in there and see if we can't get him to do a little something a little bit more committed that time next time. But anyway, that's what I'm doing. I'm using my jig to skip in there. I got a piece of gunk that time. I'm using my jig to skip in these targeted spots where you see I'm fishing along this flooded brush and I'm skipping in there just like that. Something doesn't feel right there. Did I lose my trailer? No, that felt really weird. But I'm skipping into these. I'm skipping into those flooded areas, you know, that flooded brush up underneath that. Pinpoint cast, pinpoint targets. That's where I'm trying to put my bait. And that's where I'm having the most success today, is doing that. Now, if I'm in a more open area, you know, because this is still shallow through here, you see all the hydrilla, you see all the vegetation on the water, and you can see the scum from the pollen. So the bass can be out here too. So I'm casting out, and I'm just kind of doing like that, yo-yoing it a little bit, reeling it in, yo-yoing it just a little bit, bringing it in, and that's all I'm doing. You know, we got a lot more gunk in this area, but again, casting it out, looking for those holes and those pockets, because that's where those bass are going to be hiding. They're going to be hiding in those open areas, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just doing like that, coming up and over, similar to the Texas rig retrieve we talked about last time. The concept is very simple. You want to get as close up under that brush as you possibly can. If you can skip a lure, all the better. But even if you can't, you should be practicing it, but you should also try to get that jig into as tight a spots as you possibly can. Like I said, those bass are up under there. You have to go in there after them. When it comes to fishing the hydrilla, look for those openings. Look for those areas, almost like you're flipping during the summer, right? Almost like you're pitching or punching rigs or whatever during the summer. It's the same process, because in those areas, there's going to be bass beds. And as that sun comes up over the sky and it warms the water up, those bass are going to get a little bit more active. And, in, I guess, about the 11 to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock area for me is about the best time that I find fishing grass flats, fishing hydrilla flats works the best for me. But, working a jig during the spawn, there's so many ways to do it, and it can be so productive. I catch fish after fish, and most of the time I'm catching not just bigger fish, but much bigger fish. So it's not hard to see why, a good old jig is hard to beat out on the big lake. So there you have it. Jigs catch the biggest fish in the pre-spawn and the spawn, and they do it consistently. If you're not comfortable with jigs or you don't have confidence in jigs, the pre-spawn is a great time to get acquainted with them. There's a less of a learning curve. It can become a lot easier. And once you dial that in and you get confidence in jigs, it's really hard to put that rod down and pick up something else. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.